Hi, my name is Scarlett. They always said I was the quiet one, the responsible one. I stayed behind while my sister chased spotlights. I paid bills no one thanked me for. I kept peace that nobody noticed. Until I said no. I refused to fund her Paris wedding. Just that, one no. Then she invited me to dinner. And she didn't come alone. 3 tattooed men stood beside her. She slid a contract across the table and said, "Sign it, or face the consequences." What kind of family sends backup when you won't pay for a fantasy? And what do when the people who raised you become the ones trying to erase you? Would you stay silent? Or would you do what I did? It started with a brunch invitation from my mother, the kind she liked to send with little flourish, like it wasn't anything but a casual Sunday meal in the backyard, potluck style probably. But nothing with my family was ever casual, especially not when Seraphine was involved. Charleston had just begun flirting with spring. Azaleas in full bloom, the air still cool enough to make linen feel like a smart choice. I pulled into my mother's driveway, took a deep breath, and told myself, again, this is just brunch. Don't assume anything. I had no reason to be anxious, except history. My mother's backyard looked like it had been styled for a magazine spread. Folding chairs were replaced with rented cream seatbacks, tied with pastel bows, and a large canopy shaded a catering table full of gourmet dishes no one in my family ever cooked. I spotted a few cousins I hadn't seen since Grandma's funeral. Everyone seemed to know something I didn't. "Scarlett, you made it!" Mom's voice was too bright, too rehearsed. "Come in, sit right there. We've saved a special spot for you." The special spot was dead center, just beside the mic stand. My stomach turned. A few minutes later, Seraphine arrived. Late, of course. Hair curled into effortless waves, makeup flawless, dress designer, undoubtedly. She gave me a glance that didn't reach her eyes, then turned to the crowd with the kind of confidence that only came from being the center of every story ever told in this family. "I know we're all here to catch up, but I have a little surprise," she said, her voice sugary and smooth. "Before we dig in, I want to take a moment to thank someone incredibly special." A hush fell. A screen lit up behind her. I hadn't noticed the projector before. Photos began to roll. Her engagement in Paris, venue, tours in France, mood boards with golden calligraphy and lace overlays. Then it landed. "Gratitude to our Paris wedding sponsor, Scarlett." My name, in bold, elegant font. Underneath, "Making dreams come true, one sisterly act at a time." The applause broke before I could process the punch. People turned to look at me, clapping, smiling. Some even said, "You're amazing," like I had just handed my sister the Eiffel Tower. I smiled. I clapped. My hands ached from the effort to keep the expression believable. I nodded. And inside, something cracked. I hadn't agreed to pay for her wedding. Not in Paris. Not anywhere. Not once had anyone asked. They had just decided. After the slideshow ended, I tried to step away, to get a breath, maybe a moment to think. But every cousin, aunt, and vaguely familiar friend of the family came to hug me, whisper compliments, or joke about how generous Scarlett's always been. By late afternoon, I left under the excuse of a work call. My mother kissed my cheek and said, "You really made her day, honey. I knew you'd come through." I sat in my car for 10 minutes, engine off, hands on the wheel. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I just sat there, numb, until I finally started the car. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and tried to write a post. Something, anything, to set the record straight. But every draft came off as bitter, or worse, desperate. I deleted each one. Then Seraphine posted. A carousel of her twirling in the dress boutique, captioned, "The dream dress, the dream sister who gifted it. Thank you, Scarlett, Sacre Blessed, Cirque Wedding Magic." There it was. Twist the knife, twist it again. The comments flooded in. "You're so lucky to have a sister like Scarlett. Wow, that's love right there. She really is your maid of honor and your sponsor." I didn't respond. I didn't like or comment. I sat back on my couch, staring at the screen, feeling something boil slow and deep. I closed the app. I opened my voice memos. Not because I was ready to fight, but because I was done being quiet. I scrolled through old files, most of them grocery lists or ideas I never followed through on. Then I tapped the red button. Note to self, I whispered. Don't let them write the story this time. She would get an answer, just not the one she wanted. That thought stayed with me as I sat on my back porch, the breeze rustling through the wind chimes I hadn't heard in weeks. My phone rested on the glass table, beside a half-empty cup of coffee, voice memo app open, recording the silence that stretched too long. I finally pressed stop, then play. My name is Scarlett McKenna, I began, my voice sounding distant even to myself. And I'm tired of being everyone's solution. I let it run. I didn't agree to pay for Seraphine's wedding. I didn't buy her dress. I didn't volunteer to sponsor 27 guests on a European vacation, disguised as a ceremony. The words tumbled out slowly. I talked about the applause, the fake gratitude, the Instagram post that turned me into some fairy godmother I'd never signed up to be. I spoke about paying off Seraphine's student loan a decade ago, because she forgot to tell our parents she was about to default. About the time Mom needed a dental procedure, and I covered it because Seraphine's finances were frozen. They all praised me back then. Scarlett's so responsible. She always does the right thing. Always. But lately, the right thing started to feel more like the easy scapegoat. I saved the memo and named the file Pattern. A few days later, my mother texted, "Lunch? Just you and me. I want to clear the air." I hesitated, then typed, "Sure, name the place." We met at a small cafe near the riverfront, somewhere neutral. She was already seated, stirring her tea with a deliberate calm I didn't trust. I gave her a polite nod and sat down. "Scarlett," she began with that gentle tone she used when she wanted me to bend without breaking. "I know the brunch caught you off guard, but come on. You're the most successful in the family. Helping your sister with one wedding. It's just what family does." There it was. Twist S2, right out of the playbook. Guilt wrapped in pleasantries. I kept my voice even. "It's not about the money, Mom. It's about being volunteered without my consent." She blinked. "But you always help. That's who you are." "No," I said. "That's who you expect me to be." She leaned forward, whispering as if I were the one being unreasonable. "Seraphine is trying. She's had a rough few years." "And I haven't?" I asked, louder than I meant to. A few patrons looked up from their sandwiches. "Or does being the responsible one mean my stress doesn't count?" She sighed. "You're overreacting." Of course I was. I paid the check before she could reach for it, instinct more than generosity, and walked out without a goodbye. That night, I sat in my car in the garage. I played back our entire conversation, every sugar-coated barb, every assumption that I would, again, fold quietly. I saved it. Folder name, Documentation. A few days passed. Seraphine invited me to a pre-wedding brunch. "Just a little gathering," she said. "Very low-key." I went. Mostly to observe. It was at a vineyard event space. White tablecloths, floral centerpieces, the works. A chalkboard near the seating area listed each guest's name. I scanned the list, saw Cousin Paul, Uncle Nate, Bridesmaid Chloe. Then I saw it. The sponsor. My name wasn't on it. Just that label, in bold, hand-lettered calligraphy. Twist S16. One of Seraphine's high school friends let out a loud laugh when she read it. "Oh my God, that's hilarious," she said. "She really put you down like a donor." I stood still, biting the inside of my cheek. Seraphine saw me see it, then looked away. I didn't make a scene. I didn't say a word. I sat down and smiled through the entire brunch, posed for pictures, clinked glasses, laughed when someone toasted the world's most supportive sister. But in my head, I was building something. Quietly, deliberately. Later that evening, I pulled into my driveway, left the engine running. I replayed the lunch recording with Mom. "You're the most successful. It's just what family does. You always help." Save. Backed up to the cloud. That night, my phone buzzed. Seraphine. "So excited about our trip, sis. Hope you're finalizing the wire transfer this week." I didn't respond. Instead, I opened a new note and typed, "If being the good one means being silent, I'm done with good." I wasn't going to confront her yet. First, I needed a witness. The text came late Friday evening, just after I'd poured myself a glass of red and sat down to go through some files. Seraphine's message popped up like it hadn't been days since she tried to guilt-trip me into paying for her fantasy wedding. "Private fitting tomorrow at 10. Just you, me, and some bubbles. My treat. You deserve it." She never said thank you. Not really, but she knew how to coat her manipulation in glitter and smiles. I replied with a simple, "See you then," and sat back in my chair. It wasn't trust that made me go. It was curiosity. An instinct. The boutique was downtown, nestled between a spa and a candle store that smelled like sage and overpriced linen. I arrived a few minutes early and took my time stepping in. The space was too white, too curated, like someone's Pinterest board had come to life. "Scarlett!" Seraphine beamed, arms outstretched like we hadn't just had silence and tension simmering for days. "You look tired. Busy week?" "I manage," I said, walking in carefully, scanning the room. A wedding planner I didn't recognize sat near the back, thumbing through a folder. Beside her stood a woman in a sleek pantsuit holding a notary stamp. The dress was on a mannequin, dramatic and dripping in crystals. Champagne glasses already waited on a mirrored tray. "Thought we could finalize a few details while I try this beauty on," Seraphine said, already slipping into performance mode. "You know, travel, guests, hotel stuff. Nothing major." She handed me a clipboard. "Just a formality. Confirms the guest list for Paris and aligns the deposits for the planners. You know this stuff." I smiled tightly and took it, scanning the top page. It was labeled Itinerary Acknowledgement, but something about the phrasing felt off. There were too many bullet points, too many numbers. "Mind if I take this home and look it over properly?" I asked, flipping a few pages. Seraphine's lips pulled just slightly. "It's just logistics, Scar. You don't trust me?" I didn't answer. The notary shifted her stance, clearly uneasy. "I'll feel better reading it without all the sparkle," I said, gesturing to the room. Seraphine gave a dramatic sigh. "Fine, but don't wait too long. These vendors don't do second chances." I slipped the folder into my tote and stayed long enough to let her try on the dress. She twirled like a reality show bride, fishing for compliments. I gave none. I left soon after, mumbling about needing to catch up on work. Back home, I made a fresh cup of coffee and sat at my kitchen table, pulling the document back out. I read every line. And then I read them again. Buried in page 5 was an authorization for expense management clause. Another page noted Scarlett McKenna as co-signer on a joint travel fund. Further down, a binding agreement to reimburse any and all payments made by the bride on behalf of international guests. 27 names. My chest tightened, not from shock, but from familiarity. This wasn't a slip. It was calculated. I opened my scanner app, marked the red flag lines, and saved everything into a new subfolder. Deception, Layer 1. The next morning, the phone call came. Unknown number. I answered, expecting a client. "Hi, this is Paula from Southern Coastal Bank. We're following up on a trust account recently filed for verification. Under you and a Miss Seraphine McKenna?" My hand froze midair. "I'm sorry, what trust account?" I asked. She paused. "It was opened yesterday. The authorization came with a signed affidavit attached. We just need to confirm your email on file before finalizing." "I didn't sign anything," I said calmly, though every muscle in my body tensed. There was silence. Then, "You didn't authorize this?" "No, and I need that document sent to me immediately." I gave her my contact. 10 minutes later, the email came through. There it was, my signature, dated, notarized, and pasted onto a form I'd never seen. Twist S10 wasn't just betrayal, it was fraud. I didn't scream. I didn't call Seraphine. I opened my laptop, created a folder labeled Legal Trail, and dragged the forged file in. I attached the doc to a draft email addressed to my lawyer, typing one sentence. Urgent meeting requested. Possible financial fraud involving my name. Then I saved a backup copy on an external drive, tucked it into the drawer beneath my checkbooks. No dramatics, no outbursts, just evidence. Later that afternoon, I pulled up my contacts, scrolled to Seraphine, and hit Edit. I deleted her name. I changed it to Exhibit A. Saturday morning, after a restless night and 2 cups of strong coffee, I drove to the east side of Charleston, to a small cafe tucked between a used bookstore and a thrift shop with faded mannequins in the window. It was quiet, just like I needed. I got there 10 minutes early, chose a table by the window, and kept my coat on. The wait wasn't long, but my fingers fidgeted with the hem of my sleeve, like I was still that uncertain 23-year-old waiting for her dad to show up to her college graduation. And he didn't. But this time, he did. Cormac walked in with slower steps than I remembered. His hair was grayer, beard more salt than pepper. He scanned the room, and when our eyes met, he gave a cautious nod. He didn't smile, but something softened in his face. "Scarlett," he said as he sat down, "you look steady." I almost laughed. Steady. That word again. "I manage," I said. We didn't rush into the heavy stuff. We talked about Charleston weather, a book he was reading, how he still made his own coffee, even though there was a Starbucks 2 blocks away. There was a gentle awkwardness between us, not cold, just unfamiliar. 7 years since a real conversation leaves gaps no small talk can fill. Eventually, I steered us there. "I know we haven't talked about it, but Seraphine's wedding. She's been crossing lines, big ones." He exhaled, slow. "I figured. You always cleaned up after her, even when you were kids." I looked down, tracing a finger along the coffee cup rim. This time, she forged a signature on a financial document. Mine. Cormac nodded once, then reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a weathered envelope, sealed with Scotch tape at both ends. "You might want this," he said, sliding it across the table. I opened it carefully. Inside was a copy of a property transfer from over a decade ago. My mother's signature on it, except it wasn't hers. Not even close. "I kept that in case the day ever came," he said. "Seraphine forged your mother's name to move money. I tried to bring it up back then, but, well, no one wanted to hear it." My throat tightened. Twist S4 hit not with shock, but with confirmation. She'd done this before. She just never got caught. "If she's doing it again," he added, "you need to protect yourself. Don't wait for anyone's permission." I tucked the envelope into my bag and nodded. We sat in silence for a bit longer. Not uncomfortable, just honest. When we parted, he said, "You didn't deserve what they made you carry." And I believed him. That night, I was lying on the couch, staring at the ceiling when my phone buzzed. A Facebook message. From Megan Andrews. I hadn't seen her name since we wore matching polos for high school tennis. "Hey, weird question," the message read. "Did your sister ever try to take out a loan in your name?" I sat up slowly, heart picking up speed. She continued, "I remember in college, Seraphine asked me if I knew how student loans worked under someone else's credit. Said you had amazing credit for someone so boring. I thought it was a joke." Twist S11 landed like a dull thud. It wasn't about just this wedding, or the fake dress thank you, or the brunch ambush. This was a pattern, a long-standing one. I replied, "She tried, didn't succeed then, but she's still at it." Megan answered, "I'm sorry, I wish I'd said something back then. I didn't know she'd really go that far." I didn't blame her, no one ever does, until it's too late. Later, standing in front of my bathroom mirror, I held the envelope from my father in one hand and my phone in the other, still open to Megan's message. The reflection staring back at me didn't look broken. It looked clear. "I wasn't being paranoid," I whispered. "I was just too damn polite." I drove home from the meeting with my father and Megan's message playing on loop in my head. I didn't sleep much that night. I replayed every moment, every apology I swallowed, every favor they called in, every time I bit my tongue for the sake of keeping the peace. And now, I was done making room for people who mistook my silence for submission. By Thursday, the message came in. "Seraphine again. Let's have a real talk. Just us. No drama. I want to apologize. Franco's at 6? She even used the winking emoji. The nerve of her. Franco's. The same restaurant where our parents used to celebrate anniversaries before everything fell apart. I hadn't set foot in that place in years. But I knew why she picked it. She wanted to layer the conversation with nostalgia. Make it harder to walk away. I said yes. But this time, I packed differently. My phone fully charged, a backup power bank, documents in a folder marked "in case of escalation," a small voice recorder in my purse, just in case. At 5:45, I pulled into the small lot behind Franco's. I parked under a street lamp, choosing a spot with a clear line of sight from the host stand. If something felt off, I wasn't going to sit through it. By 6 wide, I was at the table, a small booth in the corner, the kind that curves like a smile meant to keep you close. I ordered water and nothing else. At 6:13, Seraphine walked in. Of course she was late, wearing a cream blazer and holding a designer tote. But she wasn't alone. 3 men followed her in, tall, built. One wore a sports coat, another had a folder in hand. The third walked slowly, eyes scanning the room. I didn't flinch, just watched. They all approached like they were part of the reservation. One of them nodded toward the hostess, who didn't even ask questions. Seraphine slid into the booth across from me, and the men took positions nearby. 2 standing, 1 sitting at a neighboring table close enough to listen. "Scarlett," she said, smiling like nothing was out of place. "Thanks for coming." I glanced at the folder in her hand. "You said this was a talk." "It is, but I thought, maybe we can make things official to avoid confusion." She opened the folder and slid a document toward me. "It's just a simple authorization to help with the wedding planning, nothing major." I picked it up without touching it. Read the header. "Temporary Financial Delegate, Event Support Authorization." "You want me to sign over temporary control of my accounts?" I asked, meeting her gaze. "It's just for the vendors," she said sweetly. "You're busy. I figured this would simplify everything." I looked at the 3 men. One cracked his knuckles. Another looked out the window, disinterested, but present. "You brought muscle," I said flatly. She leaned in slightly. Twist S6 arrived, not with shouting, but with a whisper. "Sign it, or face the consequences." I looked down at the paper again, my name already typed. Spaces for bank info left blank, lines for initials. I slid it back. "If you go 1 step further, Seraphine, you'll cross a line you won't be able to step back from." Her smile didn't falter. "This isn't personal, Scar. It's just family stuff. You're being overly sensitive again." I stood slowly, never raising my voice. I nodded to the waiter who'd been pretending not to watch. I picked up my purse, made sure the recorder had saved, and turned toward the door. Behind me, she called out, "You're really going to walk out like this, after everything I've done for you?" I didn't answer. My car was cool when I slid in. The air smelled like vanilla from the air freshener I forgot to change. I locked the doors, plugged in my phone, and pulled up the audio file. Every word, every threat, every silence. I clicked Save As and typed in a name that felt final. Final proof. Initiate. Back home, the silence felt sharper than usual. Not the comforting kind. This was the stillness before a reckoning. I kicked off my shoes by the front door, set my purse down, and walked straight to the dining table where my laptop waited. The sunlight from the late afternoon poured across the floor like a quiet warning. Time's up. I transferred the audio from Franco's dinner to my main drive, then uploaded a backup to the cloud. My legal trail folder was growing by the hour. I labeled this one simply Threat Dinner. It sounded absurd, but it was accurate. After all, she'd said it clearly enough. Sign it, or face the consequences. And she brought backup. Not friends, not family, backup. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down, and began outlining my report to the attorney. Everything needed to be precise: dates, documents, witnesses, patterns. I listed the false invoices Seraphine had submitted for event logistics, even though I never agreed to pay for anything. I included the forged financial form, the voice memo from Mom, the original property transfer from Dad. All of it. Just after 9 p.m., my phone buzzed. Amy, my cousin, had sent me a series of screenshots with no comment, just the images. It was a thread from the family group chat, the one I wasn't in anymore. The most recent message was from my mother, not Seraphine, my mother. Scarlett's always talking about how much she cares, but what does she ever actually do? Twist S14 came like a knife I saw coming, but couldn't move fast enough to block. Another message from an aunt chimed in. She's always been so sensitive. We're just trying to plan a wedding. And another. She's making it about her again. It wasn't just Seraphine. It never had been. They were all behind my back, painting a version of me that was easier for them to justify using. I was the one with no kids, no husband, the flexible schedule, the good job, the invisible glue they relied on, but resented the moment I asked for space. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I sat quietly and reread each message, letting the familiarity of the dismissal settle in my bones. I left the phone on the couch and walked to the old cabinet in the hallway. Tucked behind a box of Christmas lights was a stack of letters I hadn't touched in years. Cards from birthdays, some condolences after Dad moved out, a few thinking of you notes from church friends long faded into memory. Halfway through the stack, I found it. A pale blue envelope addressed in the soft cursive I knew belonged to Aunt Marion, Dad's younger sister. She passed 5 years ago, quietly, after a long illness she didn't tell anyone about until it was too late. She had always been the one who looked me in the eye when I spoke, who told me I wasn't wrong for needing quiet. I never opened the envelope. At the time, I wasn't ready. Tonight, I was. Inside was a single sheet of paper, creased once down the middle. The ink was slightly smudged, like she'd paused mid-thought. Scarlett, you were always the one with the quiet heart, the one who saw everything, but never needed to be seen. Don't ever let them take your goodness and rename it weakness. Twist S13 didn't feel like pain. It felt like air after drowning. I pressed the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. The tears didn't fall hard, just a slow sting that came with relief, with truth. I sat on the floor for a while, legs folded beneath me, reading the words over and over until I had them memorized. Then I stood, walked to my desk, and scanned the letter. I added it to a new folder. Folder name, Legacy. Before bed, I opened my calendar, scrolled past client calls and dentist appointments, and moved the court date to the top. Not because I was nervous, because I was ready. The morning of the meeting, I woke before my alarm. I sat on the edge of my bed with the same tension I used to feel before job interviews, except this wasn't about employment. This was war. And I wasn't going in with a resume. I was walking in with proof. I dressed simply. A navy blouse, black slacks, no jewelry besides my father's watch, worn more for grounding than style. The manila envelope lay waiting on my kitchen counter, along with my tablet and backup copies of everything. The audio files, the documents, even Aunt Marion's letter. Not because I planned to use all of it today, but because I'd learned the hard way. Never show up to a negotiation with just your intentions. Franco's was already buzzing when I arrived. Waiters in crisp aprons rushed between tables, carrying wine and plates of pasta. The same olive tree stood in the corner, lights threaded through its branches like a permanent holiday. I took a seat in the back booth, our parents' booth, once upon a time. I ordered espresso, black, no sugar. The manila envelope rested beside my tablet, and I opened a document on screen titled Timeline of Deception. I wasn't stalling. I was reviewing. Rereading her patterns made the rage go quiet. It reminded me that what I was doing wasn't revenge. It was survival. At 6:14, Seraphine walked in. No guards this time, no fake smiles trailing behind her. Just her, dressed like a lawyer, pretending to be a sister. She slid into the seat across from me like we'd planned brunch. "Let's talk like sisters," she said, her voice just above the hum of the restaurant. I nodded once. No smile. "Let's!" I didn't speak again. I just reached into my tote and placed the envelope on the table. Slowly, deliberately. She glanced at it, then at me. "Scarlett?" I placed my phone face down next to it. Then I said calmly, "You know what this is." Her lips parted slightly. She blinked. I opened the flap and pulled out one of the documents. The one from 10 years ago, the one Dad gave me. "This is the original asset transfer from 2013. The one you forged Mom's signature on. You remember that?" Twist S12 didn't land with drama. It landed with gravity. "You told her it was temporary," I added. "But it wasn't. And what you're doing now is the same script. Different year." Seraphine didn't deny it. She didn't reach for the paper. She just stared at it like it was a spider crawling across the table. "I've already filed the complaint," I said. "With the bank, with my attorney, with the notary who allegedly witnessed my signature. I have the logs, the digital metadata, the call recordings, everything." Still, she said nothing. So I waved gently toward the bar. A young server with dark glasses turned and nodded, then led over a man in a plain blue button-up and jeans. He looked like someone's uncle, or a school teacher, but in his hand was a leather folder. "This is John," I said. "He works with my lawyer." John placed the folder gently on the table and opened it. Seraphine's eyes finally moved. Just a flick. "You're being served," I told her. Then I smiled just a little. In 3, 2, 1. Twist S7 dropped between us like a gavel. The silence that followed was different from any we'd ever shared. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't tense. It was final. John thanked us both and stepped back. Seraphine stared at the papers. Her face didn't crumble, but it cracked, just a little around the edges. "I loved you once," I said, "but I love my peace more." I stood, took my tablet, slid the envelope back into my bag, and I left. Behind me, I heard her voice, low, sharp, clinging to something that was slipping away. "This isn't over." I didn't turn around. I stepped into the warm Charleston air, let the door shut behind me, and said aloud, without raising my voice, "Oh, it is." The following Tuesday, I received a text from my mother. Short, formal, no emojis. "Family lunch, this Sunday, noon, no drama. We can still salvage this." Salvage what? The illusion? I read it twice before setting the phone face down on the counter. There was no apology, no hint of reflection, just a command wrapped in suggestion. And yet, I went. Maybe I needed to hear what they'd say when they thought the storm had passed, when they assumed I was done fighting. Maybe a part of me still wanted someone, anyone, to acknowledge what had been done. The house looked the same. White shutters, blue hydrangeas in bloom, too many throw pillows on the porch swing. The front door was slightly ajar when I arrived, and I let myself in without knocking. The smell of baked chicken and rosemary greeted me before anyone else did. They were already seated, Seraphine at the head of the table like she'd always belonged there, our mother beside her, and the others, cousins, uncles, spouses, scattered along the sides. I took the empty seat nearest the window, not that anyone had offered it. There was no eye contact, no one asked how I was. They passed the bread, commented on the weather, laughed at a meme someone shared. And then, as if reading from a script she'd memorized long ago, my mother raised her glass. "To Seraphine," she said with pride swelling in every syllable. "My visionary, the one with a future. Twist S15. A blow dressed in a toast." I didn't move. Then she added, "Scarlett's always been the quiet one, the one who does what she's told." The table chuckled softly. Someone muttered, "That's true," like it was harmless. I pulled my phone from my pocket, unlocked it, and set it on the table. Calmly, casually. Then I tapped play. A voice filled the room, familiar, unmistakable. My mother's, clear as daylight. "Scarlett? She has nothing. Never did." Twist S8 hit like a thunderclap. Forks paused midair. Napkins frozen laps. Seraphine stared at her plate. No one said a word. I looked around the table, slowly, carefully. One by one, they dropped their gazes. The silence wasn't respect, it was fear. Fear of being next, fear of their own words being played back. I stood, not rushed, not theatrical. This family tried to replace truth with tradition, rewrite me with obedience. I turned to Seraphine. "You tried to erase me, but I made myself unerasable." Still, no one spoke. My mother looked stunned, but not ashamed, just caught. I walked toward the door, the sound of my heels on hardwood, the only rhythm in the room. As I reached for the handle, I heard her voice, softer than I'd ever heard it. "Scarlett, wait." I turned just slightly, just enough. "That's not my name anymore," I said. "Not to you." Then I walked out. The sound of the front door closing behind me that day didn't feel like escape. It felt like punctuation. Something ended when I walked out of that house. And for a while, I thought that something was the last bit of love I had left for my family. But as the days passed, I realized it was something else. What ended was the version of me they could control. Seraphine's wedding never happened. At least, not the Paris one. Within 2 weeks, half the vendors pulled out. A few had already heard whispers about unpaid deposits and mismatched invoices. Then one of her old clients came forward with accusations about misused brand funds, small at first, but enough to get the attention of someone at the agency's legal department. She went quiet on social media. That alone said more than a statement ever could. No one went to jail, no one apologized. But she lost the narrative. And in her world, that was worse. I didn't celebrate it. There was no satisfaction in watching her unravel, just a quiet sort of acceptance, a knowing that consequences sometimes don't come like thunder, but like wind slowly removing a mask. In the weeks after, I found myself settling into a routine that didn't include them. I got up early. I made real breakfast again, eggs, toast, not just coffee on the go. I joined a local women's resource center, volunteering twice a week. They had a support program for women dealing with financial abuse and family coercion. I didn't need to be a therapist. I just had to tell the truth. And people listened. "I didn't realize it was abuse," one woman said to me after a session. "I thought it was just what family does." I nodded. That's the trick. They call it love when it's really leverage. They didn't cry because of what I said. They cried because someone finally named it. I wasn't a professional, but I was living proof. One night, after one of those meetings, I got home to find a small envelope in the mail. No return address. The handwriting stopped me, cold. My mother's. I didn't have to open it to know. Inside was a single card. "I was wrong," it read. "You were always more than the quiet one." No signature, no request to talk, just that. I sat on the edge of the bed, card in hand, for a long time. I didn't feel anger, not even closure. I just felt distance. I didn't write back. I didn't call. Instead, I lit a small candle and placed it on the windowsill. Not for them. For the girl I used to be. The one who stood in kitchens offering to clean up after others. The one who swallowed comments, gave without question, and only asked to be seen. She'd done enough, and now she could rest. Weeks later, I stood at the front of a small community classroom at the Women's Center. Folding chairs in a circle, cheap coffee in the corner, the smell of dry erase markers in the air. I held Aunt Marion's letter in my hand. I read it slowly, out loud. Don't let them rename your goodness. The women around me nodded. Some wiped away tears. One whispered, "That's exactly what happened to me." I smiled, not for the pain, but for the recognition. The moment someone realized they weren't imagining it, that they were never too much, or too little, just never properly seen. Later, I walked to my car under the soft yellow of the streetlight. I didn't check my phone, didn't glance at social media. There was nothing left to monitor, no one to prove anything to. As I started the engine, I said out loud, like a vow to myself, freedom didn't come when they apologized. It came the day I stopped needing them to. Sometimes standing up to your own family is the hardest thing you'll ever do, but also the most necessary, because silence doesn't keep the peace, it preserves the problem. Have you ever felt like the quiet one in your family? The one expected to absorb, endure, and never speak out? Let me know in the comments below, and if this story hit close to home, don't forget to subscribe for more real, raw stories about family, power, and reclaiming your voice.
Hello, I'm Anissa. My sister once told people I was used to scraps, and then made sure I ate Thanksgiving dinner behind her house, next to the trash bins. They called it a seating mistake. But what do you call it when your name's missing from the will, your blog gets targeted, and CPS shows up at your door, uninvited? I thought I was losing my mind, until a woman in a black Bentley pulled up and said, "We've been watching. We believe you." How did I get from leftovers to microphones? Why did my own mother say, "We can't carry her forever"? And what made my sister hate me this much? I found the gift card buried under expired coupons, old receipts, and a broken pen. It was shoved in the back of a drawer I hadn't opened since the kids started school again. The card had Darlene's perfect cursive on the back. For emergencies, don't say I never gave you anything. That morning, Amy had woken up wheezing. Her inhaler was down to its last puff, and we were between paychecks again. I stared at that shiny plastic rectangle, hating myself for even considering it. But my daughter's breath came first. I bundled her in a hoodie 2 sizes too big and told Lyle to come with us. We didn't talk much on the drive. The cold had crept into the old car again. Heat only worked when it wanted to. And all I could think about was how badly I needed this to just work. At the pharmacy, I handed the card over with a hopeful smile I'd practiced in the rearview mirror. The cashier, a young guy with pink hair and bitten nails, slid it once, then again, then slower the third time. "I'm sorry, it's not going through." "Try it again," I said, already knowing. He did. Nothing. Amy tugged my coat. "Are we still getting lunch after?" My throat tightened. "We'll see, baby." I paid in quarters, dimes, and 2 wrinkled singles. I left with a brown paper bag and a heat in my face that had nothing to do with the wind outside. We got back in the car, and I didn't speak the entire way home. Lyle didn't ask. He just looked out the window, jaw clenched like his father's used to when he was hiding disappointment. Amy clutched her inhaler like a secret. After I tucked her into a nest of blankets on the couch, I made myself a cup of weak tea. That's when I remembered. Darlene had given me that card at her birthday brunch 3 months ago. Somewhere between the avocado toast and the endless mimosas, she had smiled that tight-lipped smile and slid it across the table like it was a check I'd never cash. "Use it when your freelancing dreams crash again," she'd said. "Or just, when you're out of gas." Her friends laughed. I laughed too. That's what I did back then. Smile, play along, pretend none of it got to me. Now I was standing in my kitchen, holding a worthless card like it was evidence in a trial no one would ever see. I snapped it in half. It made a satisfying crack, but the sting stayed. Later that night, with the kids asleep, I opened my laptop and typed. They say it's the thought that counts. But what if the thought was cruel? The next morning, I was folding laundry on the couch, half watching a cartoon Amy liked and half ignoring the buzzing in my phone. It was Saturday, quiet, unremarkable. Lyle was in his room, probably sketching again, and Amy had wrapped herself in the same blanket she slept under. I unlocked my phone, just to scroll while I waited for the dryer to finish. The screen lit up with a photo. Darlene, in white lace, standing under a floral arch I recognized from our mother's backyard. I blinked. Then came another photo. Champagne flutes, gold-accented cupcakes, a sparkly banner, #second chances, #Ridge vows again. I scrolled faster. There were at least 30 shots. Her smiling, him smirking, people laughing in the background. Friends, neighbors, old cousins I hadn't seen since Dad's funeral. Our mother, Lorraine, stood beside her in one photo, wiping away a tear with a tissue folded perfectly in half. Then I saw the video. It was Lorraine giving a toast. "To my beautiful daughter," she said, glass raised. "You've always made me proud. This is the life you were meant for." There was no mention of me, no tag, not a word, and the caption below one group shot read, "Everyone important was here." I froze. My chest felt hollow, like the air had turned solid inside it. Lyle walked into the room with a bowl of cereal. He glanced at the phone and saw what I was watching. He didn't ask a thing. He just turned around and walked back out. No sound, no expression, and somehow that hit harder than anything else. I almost typed out a message to Darlene, then deleted it. What was I going to say? Congrats on pretending I don't exist. I thought about last year, Thanksgiving, when she'd said, "We're keeping it small this year, just the core." I had shown up anyway with sweet potato pie and 2 well-dressed kids, and we'd eaten on folding chairs in the garage. That night, once the house was quiet again, I opened a new post draft. I used to think I was being forgotten, but forgetting is accidental. This was on purpose, a clean cut, sharp, practiced. I stared at the blinking cursor, then typed, "Family doesn't forget you, they erase you." The following week, while checking my inbox during a short break at work, I saw her name again. "You're invited," the subject line read, followed by a smiling photo of Darlene mid-speech, standing behind a podium draped in baby pink silk. Join us in celebrating Central Ohio's single mothers at the Ridge Foundation launch. Together, we uplift. Amy was brushing her teeth when I showed her the screen. "Are we going, Mom?" she asked, foam in the corners of her mouth. I hesitated, then nodded. "We'll go, just to see what it's about." The community center was buzzing when we got there. Rows of pastel balloons framed the entrance, and women in matching t-shirts directed foot traffic inside. No one greeted us. No one handed us a program. We slipped in like strangers at a wedding where we weren't invited. Again. Darlene stood on a stage draped in blush velvet, wearing a pristine white pantsuit and holding a mic like she was born with it. I stood in the back with Amy beside me, surrounded by polished people nodding along as my sister said things like, "Every mother deserves a seat at the table, even if they've never had one before." I moved toward one of the booths, scholarships for enrichment programs. Amy had wanted to try theater camp next summer. A woman with a clipboard smiled tightly when I asked about applying. "I'm sorry," she said softly, eyes sliding away. "This is for pre-approved families, invitation only, part of our internal outreach list." I opened my mouth, then shut it. Amy looked up at me with wide eyes. I didn't want her to see me unravel. On stage, Darlene hugged a young mom holding a toddler. Flashbulbs popped. Applause filled the room. And in all her polished, practiced language, not once did she mention my blog, the one that had covered stories like this for years. The one I had started after leaving my ex, when writing was the only thing I could do after midnight while the kids slept. As we turned to leave, Amy asked, "Are we not struggling enough?" I didn't answer. I just held her hand tighter. That night, I sat at my laptop again, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The words came easily this time. It's easy to love the idea of the poor when they're not sitting at your dinner table. It's even easier when they don't share your last name. Later that week, while sorting mail and half listening to a documentary playing in the background, my phone buzzed. Lorraine's name flashed across the screen. I didn't pick up. I wasn't ready for another round of pleasantries masked as judgment. But then, she didn't hang up. At first, it was static. Then her voice, muffled like she was on speakerphone. I've done what I could for her, Dar, but let's be real. She's always been the problem. We can't carry her forever. I froze, phone still in my hand, pressed to my chest like a wound. Darlene responded with something I couldn't quite catch, but Lorraine's voice stayed sharp and clear. She makes everything harder than it needs to be. Always has. I'm tired of pretending. Each word landed like a slap. I hadn't expected much from her, but even so, this cut deeper. She wasn't whispering. She wasn't careful. She was certain. Then came the part I won't ever forget. I'll make sure she doesn't cause trouble during the holidays, she said, calm as ever. But she's not part of our plan. Our plan. As if I was some stray piece that didn't belong on the puzzle. The sound of Lyle's footsteps pulled me back. He came into the room, took one look at my face, and said nothing. He didn't need to. He just walked over and wrapped his arms around me. I sank to the floor with him beside me, both of us silent. He was 12. He shouldn't have had to hold up his mother. My mind flashed to 5th grade, the night of the parent-teacher conference. Lorraine had promised to come. I wore the red sweater she said made me look neat, but she never showed. Later, I found out she was at Darlene's ballet recital, front row, beaming in every photo. Even now, she never picked me. Later that night, after Lyle and Amy had gone to sleep, I stared at my laptop screen. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, then began to move. A mother isn't just the woman who gave birth to you. She's the one who shows up. She's the one who sees you. I paused. And sometimes, she's just the one who chose someone else. Thanksgiving crept in with a gray sky and brittle wind. The streets were quiet, lined with cars parked for family dinners and crowded driveways. Mine wasn't one of them. I ironed Amy's dress while Lyle adjusted his shirt collar in the mirror. We packed up the pie she helped bake and drove in silence to Bentley Creek. As expected, no one answered the door. I knocked once, then let us in. The warmth hit like a wall, fireplace on, jazz humming low, and clinking glasses in the background. I guided the kids through the entryway, their footsteps swallowed by thick carpet. Darlene appeared in stilettos and a wine-colored silk dress. She didn't look surprised to see us. "Oh, you brought something," she said, eyeing the pie. "That's cute." Lorraine sat perched on the edge of the white couch, swirling her wine. She didn't bother to stand or even look directly at me. Just muttered, "Traffic must have been something." I set the pie on the counter, straightened up, and forced a smile. A few minutes later, Darlene clapped her hands. "So," she announced cheerfully, "we're a little tight on space this year, but don't worry, we've set you guys up out back." I blinked. "Out back?" She gestured toward the side door with a smirk. "It's private, and, well, she's used to scraps." The room hushed. Forks stopped mid-air. No one laughed. No one said a word. Lyle's jaw tensed. Amy looked up at me, confused. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I picked up the pie and nodded once. "Let's go." The back patio wasn't even set. A folding table had been dragged next to the trash bins. 2 chairs, 1 crate, paper napkins held down by a salt shaker. Amy tried to smooth her dress as she sat. Lyle just stood there, arms crossed, refusing the food. I plated things like it was a picnic and cracked a joke about alfresco dining. Neither of them laughed. I stood up and walked back inside to grab napkins. Darlene was reaching for a bottle of wine. "Next time," I said quietly, "don't pretend. Just say we're not welcome." She looked at me, raised one brow, and shrugged. What would be the fun in that? The day after Thanksgiving, I woke up with the kind of exhaustion that sits behind your eyes. I packed up the empty casserole dish I'd brought to Darlene's, untouched, of course, and told the kids I'd be back before dinner. They didn't ask where I was going. Lorraine's condo sat in a cul-de-sac that looked like it had never seen conflict. White shutters, trimmed hedges, quiet driveways. I knocked twice. She answered with that thin-lipped smile she wore like a shield. "Well, look who's here. Everything all right?" she asked, like the night before hadn't happened. "I'm just returning the dish," I said. She motioned for me to come in. "You want some wine? There's still a bottle open." "I'm good." We moved to the kitchen. She moved slowly, like the weight of appearances was getting heavier with age. I placed the dish in her sink and turned to leave, but something caught my eye. A folder spread halfway open on the dining table. Legal blue, gold stamped, estate planning final draft. I froze. Lorraine's phone buzzed in the other room. She stepped out muttering something about the cable bill. Alone, I leaned closer. The folder was filled with typed pages. Structured, clean, names bolded. Except mine. I flipped to the list of beneficiaries. Darlene, her husband, even a trust set up for their unborn second child. Nothing for me, not even a mention. My breath caught somewhere between my chest and my throat. She walked back in, brushing hair behind her ear like she hadn't just edited me out of her life. I held up the folder. Why am I not in this? She sighed, didn't meet my eyes. Darlene has children, and she's running a business. You? Right. Sometimes. The words didn't sting. Not anymore. They settled into the part of me already bruised. You've made it clear where I stand, I said calmly. Just don't expect me to keep pretending. I slid the folder back to where I found it. I won't be at Christmas, I added, reaching for the door. She didn't argue. She just picked up her wine glass. At the doorway, I paused. If anything else gets done behind my back, I said, I promise it won't stay there. I didn't even get a chance to take my coat off before the knock came. Not a knock. 3 sharp raps, purposeful. I opened the door to find a woman in a navy windbreaker, clipboard in hand. Behind her, a white sedan with a state logo idled at the curb. Miss Fulton? I'm with Child Protective Services. My stomach dropped. She stepped inside before I could say yes. We received a report of possible neglect, expired food, unsafe sleeping arrangements, verbal instability. I blinked. What? Lyle appeared from the hallway. Amy stood by the kitchen counter, clutching her cereal spoon midair. The woman scanned the living room like she already knew what she'd find. Do you mind if I take a quick look around? I nodded stiffly. What else could I do? The apartment wasn't spotless, but it was clean. Their beds were made. The fridge was stocked. Amy had colored sticky notes on the wall for her asthma reminders. Lyle's books were lined up next to the heater. She asked questions, took notes. I answered every single one, but deep down I knew this wasn't random. After she left, I sat on the couch in silence while the kids watched cartoons like nothing happened. My hands didn't stop shaking until they went to bed. That night, I logged onto my blog, hoping to lose myself in something else. Instead, I found comments. Dozens of them. Ugly ones. Stop using your kids for pity. Another single mom sob story. She's mad her rich sister won't bail her out. They were all anonymous, with usernames like TruthTeller102 and Concerned Auntie. All new, all fake. One quoted Darlene's words. She's used to scraps. Word for word. I wasn't shocked. Not anymore. I was tired of being polite about poison. So I hit record. The video was under 3 minutes. If this is supposed to scare me quiet, you picked the wrong woman. If you want war, fine, but don't pretend you're doing it out of love. By morning, the post had gone viral. Real people, women who'd been cut out, dismissed, bruised by family in pearls and power suits, began commenting, sharing, lifting me. That night, I tucked the kids in, closed the blinds, and double-checked the locks. I didn't know what they'd try next. But I knew one thing. I was ready. The week passed quietly, but not peacefully. My phone buzzed every hour. Notifications, shares, strangers' support. But also silence from the people who should have said something. That was louder. Then, on a gray Thursday morning, Lyle shouted from the window, "Mom, there's a fancy car outside." I looked. A black Bentley, gleaming, slow, out of place on our cracked street. The door opened. A woman stepped out. Gray suit, heels that didn't flinch on the icy curb. She carried herself like someone who never begged to be heard. "Anissa Fulton?" she asked. I nodded, guarded. "I'm Velma Whitmore. I run Reclaim Dignity. We saw your video and your blog. We'd like you to open our advocacy summit next week." I blinked. "Why me?" she smiled. "Because your story isn't rare. You just had the guts to tell it." A week later, I stood backstage in a downtown Columbus ballroom. Velvet curtains, spotlights, rows of folding chairs filled with faces like mine. Tired, curious, quietly strong. Velma introduced me. She reminded us that family doesn't always mean safety. Sometimes it means surviving anyway. Please welcome Anissa Fulton. My hands didn't shake. I spoke from the place behind my ribs, the part that had broken too many times not to harden. I told them about the gift card that didn't work, about the wedding that didn't include me, about folding chairs behind a garbage bin while people with my blood toasted champagne inside. She said I was used to scraps, I said. But here's what they never understood. Scraps don't make you small. They make you resourceful. They sharpen you. Silence. Then applause. Then a wave. Women lined up after. Some hugged me. Some whispered, "That was me. I thought it was just me." Back home that evening, I lit a candle and poured tea. Darlene's number flashed across my screen. I let it ring. A minute later, Lorraine's message popped up. "Saw the video. Hope you're well." I replied, "We're better than ever. Thanks." I put the phone down, looked around my apartment. The same space. But it felt different. I'd been pushed to the margins, and somehow, I'd built a platform there. 2 weeks after the summit, the silence didn't sting. It simply confirmed everything I already knew. One gray afternoon, I was folding laundry when a memory hit like a slow wave. It was years ago, back when Darlene had just started dating Raymond. He was charming, the kind of man who always looked for reflections of himself in every mirror, and every woman's eyes. One evening, after a family dinner, he'd cornered me in the kitchen, said I looked way better than Darlene ever mentioned. I told him to back off. He smiled like I was the joke. That same night, Darlene caught me walking out of the hallway, alone. But it didn't matter. Her mind had already built the scene she needed. She never saw me the same after that. But the real wound was older. I was 21, scared, and sitting in a clinic lobby. My mother beside me, purse clenched, voice tight. "If you keep this baby," Lorraine had said, "you'll ruin your life, and mine." And just like that, my voice disappeared. I didn't speak of it for years. I had buried it under diapers, side gigs, and long shifts. Until now. That night, Amy curled up next to me on the couch. She fiddled with the hem of her pajamas, her eyes wide. "Will we ever see them again?" she asked softly. I ran my fingers through her curls. "No, baby, we don't need to." She didn't argue, just held tighter. Later, my phone buzzed again. Lorraine. One line. "Saw the article? Congratulations, I guess." I stared at it, then typed back, "I hope someday you understand what real family means." I blocked the number. Weeks passed. I mailed a check, quietly, to 2 local shelters. One was the same center I'd been turned away from. This time, no name attached. Just a note. From someone who remembers what it's like to be overlooked. Rumors started swirling. Darlene's firm lost a client after social media backlash. Raymond was spotted at a fundraiser. Alone. No ring. That wasn't my doing. Not directly. And that's the difference between revenge and truth. They didn't break me. They revealed me. And now, I write my own script. One where scraps aren't even on the menu. Before I close this chapter completely, let me leave you with this. I used to think survival was about staying quiet, staying small, staying grateful for crumbs. But what I've learned is this. Silence doesn't keep the peace. It just keeps the pain polite. Family isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes it's the people who show up, who see your worth, who choose you even when it's inconvenient. And sometimes, that person has to be you. So if you're watching this and feeling like the outcast in your own family, please know, being cut out doesn't mean you're worthless. Sometimes it just means you were never part of a table that deserved you. I've walked through shame, betrayal, and isolation, but I've also rebuilt. Brick by brick, voice by voice. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been made to feel like the problem, just for existing? Have you ever been erased, but found your own pen and wrote yourself back in? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. Let's talk about it. And hey, if this video touched something deep in you, even just a little, comment A or tell me where you're watching from. If it didn't resonate, tell me why. I welcome all perspectives here. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next story.
Hello, my name is Maria. The night before they rolled me into surgery to remove a tumor from my body, my sister slept with my husband, in my bed, in the home I built. And the next morning, while I laid unconscious under anesthesia, she listed my house for rent without my name on it. They thought I was too weak to notice, too sick to fight back, too quiet to matter. But they forgot. Quiet doesn't mean blind, and silence doesn't mean surrender. So I changed my will in silence. And what they didn't know is that the woman they tried to erase was the one holding the pen. What else do you think they tried to take? The air inside my house felt thicker than usual. Not hot, not humid, just heavy, like it knew something was coming. I sat at the old oak kitchen table, the one Mama refinished by hand before she passed, papers spread out before me. It was almost 7 p.m. The light filtering in through the lace curtains was dimming into that golden hour hue that always made the house feel warmer than it was. My pen hovered over the line labeled Witness, and for a second I just stared at it like it might offer me something more than ink and good intentions. The will was simple. I'd written and rewritten it for weeks, always stopping short of making it official. But tonight, something inside me felt finished. Not defeated, just ready. I hadn't told anyone. No one except Rachel Lane, my lawyer, who handled everything over email and a private Dropbox. Isolde didn't know. Neither did Marshall. I didn't want ceremony, just clarity. I'd named Isolde as the recipient of the house. Our family home. The one built with Daddy's inheritance and Mama's sweat, because that's what Mama would have wanted, or at least what she said before her last breath. You take care of your sister, Mireya. She's good with people. She'll know what to do. I used to believe that. I think part of me still did. Until tonight. After signing the last page, I pressed it flat with both hands. The paper made a soft sound under my palms, like a sigh. It was done. Just in case I didn't make it through the surgery tomorrow morning, just in case my heart stopped mid-procedure or I never woke up, at least I'd tied up the loose ends. I made tea the way Mama used to, loose chamomile leaves in a little tin mesh ball, steeped in silence. The TV was off. My phone was face down. It was the first moment in weeks I felt like I was truly alone, and oddly enough, I needed that. My thoughts drifted, first to the night Marshall proposed, then to the first time Isolde held Elora like she'd birthed her herself. I'd always been the quiet one, the fixer, the afterthought who kept the gears oiled. It was fine. I never needed center stage. I just wanted to matter in the quiet ways. As I stirred my tea, my phone lit up. FaceTime, Elora. She rarely called me this late, especially on video. I hesitated. Maybe she was nervous about my surgery, or maybe she needed something only I would understand. Elora had always been my soft spot. I thumbed the screen and answered. At first, I saw nothing, just a blurry ceiling fan and the muffled sound of voices. I waited. Elora? I said gently. A hand came into view, fumbling with the phone. Then suddenly, too suddenly, the angle flipped. The screen filled with the image of my bedroom, my bed, my husband, Marshall. He was shirtless, laughing at something out of frame. And then Isolde appeared, my sister, my blood, in my robe, sitting on the edge of my bed like she belonged there. I couldn't breathe. They didn't see me. Not at first. They were so deep in their own little world, Isolde's hand on his shoulder, his smile aimed only at her, that the phone's glow didn't register. When Marshall finally glanced at the screen, his face dropped. Mireya. That's all I heard before I ended the call. I set the phone down slowly. Not a slam, not a toss, just a quiet placement on the table like I was setting down a hot plate that burned through me. The tea had gone cold. I stood up, walked to the hallway, past the family portraits, past the framed certificate Mama left me, past everything that felt suddenly meaningless. I stopped at the bedroom door, then turned and walked to the recliner in the den instead. I sat down, curling a throw blanket around my legs, the same one Marshall gave me for Christmas 5 years ago. It felt heavier now, like it knew. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't do anything you see in movies. I just sat there, eyes unfocused, heart not racing, just quietly closing in on itself. Hours passed. I don't know how many. Eventually, I stood and walked back to the kitchen. The will still lay there, smug in its finality. I picked up the pen again. Crossed out the note I'd written to Isolde. Take care of the house. Keep it full of light. Instead, I scribbled something else in sharp, slow letters. You'll inherit nothing but your own shame. Then I capped the pen, folded the paper, and tucked it into the manila envelope. I placed it in the drawer with the emergency contact list and my living will. The folder creaked as I slid it shut, like even the wood couldn't believe what it now contained. I turned off the kitchen light, walked down the hallway, paused in front of the bedroom again, then turned away one last time. The gray sky didn't lift as I stepped outside, and neither did the weight in my chest. The early light felt foreign, as if the world itself had changed overnight and forgotten to inform me. My neighbor's wind chimes clinked in the breeze, soft and out of rhythm. I pulled my coat tighter around me, not for warmth, but for armor. At the hospital, everything moved faster than my thoughts. One nurse strapped the blood pressure cuff to my arm, another asked about my last meal, while a third read out consent forms like she was ordering off a menu. Then came the question that made me blink hard. Emergency contact? I paused. Just a breath. Then answered, Elora. There was a brief glance between the nurses, the kind they thought I wouldn't catch. The clipboard moved on, and no one asked why I didn't list my husband. While I waited in the pre-op holding room, a different nurse peeked in with a warm smile. Your family's already in the lobby. They brought coffee. I smiled back. That's nice of them. And then they walked in. Marshall came first, holding a tray of 2 coffees, the kind he never used to drink, lattes with syrup and foam art. But one of them wasn't for me. It was for Isolda, who stepped in behind him. Dressed like she was going to a conference, not a hospital, hair set, heels low but sharp, the same perfume that always made Mama cough. And her purse, her signature burgundy leather clutch, dangling from Marshall's forearm like he was used to carrying it. I hope you're feeling ready, Isolda said, leaning in to press her lips against my cheek. I didn't lean back. Morning, Marshall added, voice too upbeat for someone whose wife was being cut open in 2 hours. A nurse nearby smiled and said, Your sister is so involved. You're lucky to have her. I nodded, eyes dry, throat tight. Lucky, I echoed. I caught sight of my chart in Isolda's hands. She'd picked it up without asking. I didn't say a word. I just watched her flip through it like it was a Sunday flyer. Marshall pulled up a chair, but never quite sat. He hovered, as if waiting for the next scene to start, as if he wasn't part of the last one that shattered me. After a few more rehearsed phrases, You've got this. Stay strong. We'll be right here. They left. Just like that. The nurse who wheeled me in said, They looked so concerned. Did they? And the prep room was cold, sterile in more ways than one. I lay there while the anesthesiologist explained the risks, but I barely heard a word. My mind wandered to the will again, the name I'd written in ink, the legacy I'd just handed over. My last thought before slipping under the anesthesia wasn't fear, it was surrender. Maybe I wouldn't wake up, and maybe that would be easier, but I did wake up, and the silence that greeted me was louder than anything I'd ever heard. No voices, no beeping of gifts arriving, no murmurs of family at the door, just the low hum of machines and the scratchy linens pulled too tightly over my legs. I looked around. The flowers on the side table weren't real. The water jug was empty. On the bedside table was a granola bar, half-eaten and carelessly left behind. A nurse entered, cheerful in that professional way. How are you feeling, Miss Sorrell? Fine, I said. You had a smooth procedure. They had to step out, but they'll be back later. Something came up. I didn't ask what. She fluffed my pillows and adjusted the IV bag, then left with a breezy, "Let us know if you need anything." The door clicked shut. I stared at the ceiling tiles, counted 3 in every direction. I turned to the wall instead. It wasn't the loneliness that got me. It was the precision of the abandonment. This wasn't a missed call or a forgotten anniversary. This was a calculated absence. The kind where people aren't just busy, they've moved on without you. Even as I lay there, bruised, stitched, sliced open, they couldn't be bothered to stay. I wasn't angry yet. I was humiliated. They weren't just betraying me, they were doing it with ease, with routine. I turned slowly to my side and unplugged the welcome screen monitor. The smiling logo disappeared, leaving only my reflection in the black screen, pale, eyes dull, hair matted against the pillow. I reached for the call button. When the nurse returned, I looked her in the eye. "Can I get a pen?" "Of course," she said, a little confused, but left to get one. I waited. I wasn't sure what I'd write yet, but I knew something had to be written, because silence, I was learning, was only powerful if you used it to sharpen the knife. I wrote the words slowly, one deliberate curve at a time. My name will not die quietly. There was no dramatic flair to it, just a hospital napkin, a borrowed pen, and a silence so thick I could feel it pressing against my chest. I folded the napkin twice and slid it into my phone case like a receipt I needed to remember, but not show just yet. That line wasn't a threat. It was a promise, to myself, to my mother's memory, to the version of me they thought they had buried beneath kindness and compliance. Discharge came quicker than expected. The doctor said I was recovering well, considering the circumstances. No one from my family showed up to drive me home, so I called a neighbor, Mrs. Dunham, who thought I'd been out of town visiting cousins. She talked the whole way, unaware she was helping me piece myself together with every mile. By the time we pulled into my driveway, I'd decided to be something different than what I had been before that operating table. The house smelled like bleach and lavender when I stepped in. The air was still, too still. I stood just inside the door for a moment, keys still in hand, scanning every detail. Nothing out of place, and that's what unsettled me. Everything looked intentional. The mail had been stacked neatly on the counter. Dishes from before the hospital were gone. Even the guest room door, normally slightly ajar, was shut. I walked into the living room, set my bag down, and froze. The wedding photo that had sat on the mantel since our 10th anniversary was gone. In its place was a decorative frame that said, "Family is forever," holding a photo of Marshall and Isolde at a charity banquet. I didn't move for a full minute, just stared. Then I sat down on the couch, opened Marshall's laptop, the one he never locked because, in his words, "What would I need to hide from you?" The screen lit up instantly. His email was already open. So was a message box. A text thread blinked in front of me. From Isolde. "We just need her to sign. Then we're free." I stared, blinked once, maybe twice. I didn't gasp or cover my mouth. I just dragged the cursor to the corner of the screen and clicked Screenshot. Saved it to a hidden folder I created right then. I closed the laptop, picked it up, and carried it to the kitchen. Set it on the table. Looked around again. They weren't even being careful anymore. This wasn't a fling or a mistake or a weak moment. This was a plan, a deliberate dismantling. And I'd almost helped them do it, on paper, in court, in trust. As I stood there, my phone rang. It was Ava, my lawyer friend since college, someone I'd once split a bottle of wine with while crying over bad men and better dreams. I answered. "Hey." Her voice was tight. "Did you change your power of attorney?" "No," I said, slowly. "Why?" "Because someone filed new paperwork. Backdated. Claims of diminished capacity. Filed a week ago. From your sister." I didn't respond. My fingers dug into the edge of the counter. Ava continued, her voice cautious. "Mireya, they're building a case that you're not well enough to make decisions. Mental decline, likely using your diagnosis and recovery to bolster it." I whispered, "They're not just replacing me. They're erasing me." A beat passed. Then Ava said, "I'm sending you the documents. Don't sign anything from them. Not a damn thing." We hung up. I stood in the kitchen for another moment, the room still too clean, the light from the windows too gentle for the wreckage I now carried. Then I got to work. I pulled out a folder from the hallway cabinet, one I hadn't touched since before the diagnosis. It held copies of my marriage license, my deed to the house, old insurance policies. I placed it next to the will. Then I opened my laptop and started printing. Every document that mentioned my name, every record I had of ownership, contribution, status, nonprofit board minutes, emails from the foundation's creation, photos from opening day. Anything that would scream, I was here, I mattered, I didn't shake, I didn't rush. My hands were steady, my breath calm. I printed for hours. The whir of the printer was like a drumbeat in a war march I hadn't known I'd been walking toward. When the last page slid out, I gathered them into labeled folders, slipped them into a file box, and placed it under my bed. Then I walked to the mirror in my bedroom. I looked at myself, not for signs of age or illness, but for signs of what they thought had vanished. And I said out loud, to the face looking back, "You want war, Isolde? I'll give you legacy." When I hung up the call to Rachel Lane's office, my hands were steady, but something inside me had shifted for good. I wasn't trembling. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't even crying. I was cooling, like steel being tempered. That afternoon, I went outside to trim the azaleas along the front walk. They had bloomed late this year. The sun peeked through thick spring clouds, casting a warm light over the porch. I had barely gotten through one shrub when Mrs. Walden from next door strolled up with her usual walking stick and a Diet Coke in hand. "I passed by your house listing on my niece's Facebook," she said, cheerful as ever. "Didn't know you were planning to rent it out to your sister. That's awfully generous." I blinked. My pruning shears paused mid-cut. "I'm sorry?" I asked, like I hadn't heard her correctly. She smiled, a little confused. "The Post says your house is available for short-term lease, pictures and everything. Isolde listed as the co-owner. Said it's part of the Renford estate planning." My stomach dropped, not a plummet, more like a quiet folding. "Oh," I said. I hadn't realized she'd posted it already. She patted my shoulder, not sensing the fire behind my skin. "Well, I hope it works out. Maybe it's time to downsize anyway, what with everything you've been through." I nodded and smiled politely until she turned the corner. Then I dropped the clippers, went inside, and dialed Derek Carter, a realtor friend from college who owed me one for referring him half the neighborhood. Within the hour, he emailed me a link. There it was, a public listing, my house, my living room, with my mother's antique quilt folded neatly on the couch, my books arranged by color, just like I'd done when I needed peace. My kitchen, spotless, too spotless. The listing read, "Renford Family Legacy Home, available for summer lease. Contact Isolde Renford, Executive Family Trustee." My name was nowhere to be found. No mention of Maria, no mention of illness, recovery, or the fact that I was still very much alive and on that deed. She wasn't just rewriting our legacy, she was omitting me completely. I printed the listing, all pages, then the property tax history, the deed, my latest utility bill. I gathered everything and slipped it into a labeled manila folder. Renford fraud. I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I circled a date on the calendar. I'd heard whispers about a private gathering Isolde was planning. Nothing official, just murmurs from mutual acquaintances who always assumed I knew what my sister was up to. But I hadn't received an invitation. A few days later, Elora dropped by, nervously holding a letter. "I didn't know you weren't on the guest list," she said. The envelope read, "A tribute to the women of the Renford legacy." Inside was a gold-embossed program for a family celebration, funded and hosted by Isolde, highlighting generations of Renford women. The front cover had a photo of Mama. Below it, Isolde's portrait, smiling like she'd invented the family name herself. There was mention of our great-aunt Cecilia, of our cousin Dana, even of Mama's third cousin from Savannah who once ran a quilting circle. But not a single mention of me. I flipped through the pages slowly. No scholarship mention had my name. The Women's Foundation, founded by me, designed by me, was now credited solely to Isolde's vision and lifelong service. My hands didn't shake. Elora looked like she might cry. "I swear I thought you were in it. I just assumed." "It's fine," I said calmly. That night, I watched the live stream, alone. Isolde stood in front of a velvet backdrop, under gold string lights, and thanked the guests for trusting her to carry forward the voice of the Renford women. She ended her speech with Mama's favorite quote, "We rise by lifting others." She said it like she'd written it, like she believed it. I sat on the couch, eyes focused, hands folded, no explosion, no tears. When the stream ended, I stood up, walked to the hallway closet, and pulled out the fireproof lockbox Mama had given me the week before she died. Inside was the original deed to the house, signed by Daddy, witnessed by Mama, filed under my name alone. I held it in my hands and whispered to the quiet, "Erase me from your mouth, but I own your walls." Then I picked up the phone and dialed. After 2 rings, a voice answered crisply, "Law Office of Rachel Lane, how may I help you?" I hung up the call with Rachel and sat back in my car, letting the hum of the engine cover the sound of my pulse in my ears. The sun was just starting to dip behind the Spanish moss hanging from the oaks along Broad Street, and traffic was light. I didn't drive home right away. Instead, I pulled over near the cemetery where Mama was buried. I didn't go in. I just looked at the gate for a while. I thought about how she used to say, "Don't you ever beg for a seat at a table you helped build." I had helped build the Renford name in silence, and now I was being erased by a woman who wore our family crest like a brand logo. That evening, I started laying the next stone in my path. I knew Isolde expected me to fold, so I began to act the way she needed me to. At family brunches, I smiled too long. I asked people to repeat simple sentences. I forgot names I had repeated all my life. I told stories that wandered off and never circled back. I let my hands tremble when I reached for a fork, and I paused before remembering birthdays I had never once missed. It wasn't hard. Not because I was sick, but because pretending to be weak when you know you're not is the sharpest tool in a betrayed woman's drawer. At one of those brunches, she leaned in toward a friend of hers, some woman from the foundation board who always wore linen and pity, and said, "It won't be long now." I heard it from across the room. Elora noticed too. She sat silently next to me, her eyes watching, her lips a tight line. She didn't speak, but the next time we were alone, she slid an envelope into my purse and whispered, "You didn't get this from me." I opened it at home. Inside were the board meeting minutes from last quarter. And there it was, in black and white, Isolde claiming she had initiated, organized, and implemented the Renford Women's Fund in its entirety. My name had been omitted entirely, not even a passing mention as a contributor or co-founder. I didn't call her. I didn't cry. I logged into the foundation's administrative backend. I hadn't checked in months. I clicked through to the About Us page and saw it had been scrubbed clean. All photos of the launch that included me were gone. The founder bio listed only Isolde, with glowing accolades, international citations, and a fabricated timeline that rewrote the last 5 years of my life. She said it was best to consolidate the legacy under one name, Elora told me later, barely able to meet my eyes. She already did, I said. Hers. I didn't need vengeance. I needed facts. The next morning, I gathered printouts, website archives, time-stamped photos, IRS registration forms. I slipped them into a thin red folder and labeled it Legacy Fraud. And then, I invited her to tea. I picked a quiet garden cafe that Mama used to love, the kind of place with metal chairs that creaked and chipped paint on the fences. I got there early and ordered Earl Grey. When she arrived, late but grand, in a beige silk scarf and wedge sandals, I stood to greet her with a smile. We talked about the weather, about Elora's internship. She complimented my earrings, said they were classy in a subtle way. I nodded. They were Mama's. She gave a tight-lipped smile. We talked for 20 minutes, nothing real, just the kind of polite Southern-coded warfare our family had been trained in since birth, sugar layered over salt. When the tea got cold, I reached into my bag and pulled out the manila envelope. "This is for you," I said. She hesitated, but took it. Her hands didn't shake. Inside were the screenshots from the housing listing, the edited foundation page, and board meeting minutes, all annotated in red. On top, I had placed a post-it. It read, "If you continue, I will too." She skimmed the contents, didn't look up for a long time. Then finally, with a slight chuckle, she leaned back. "Mireya," she said, as if reading a line off a cue card, "you don't have the stomach for war." I didn't blink. "No," I said calmly. "I have the inheritance." She laughed, short and breathy, like I had told a mildly offensive joke. Then she stood, adjusted her scarf, and left the folder on the table. I let her go, because I wasn't finished yet. By the time I stepped out of the post office that morning, the envelope was gone. Sealed, addressed, dropped into the blue steel box outside the door with a soft metallic clunk. It would land on her desk tomorrow afternoon, labeled plainly, "To be opened in good faith." It was nearly noon when I pulled back into my driveway. The wind had picked up, shaking the azalea blossoms onto the steps. Charleston's spring always arrived with color, even when the world behind your windows was gray. I made my way into the house, quietly, intentionally, and set my keys on the counter like I wasn't about to change everything. I had just come from Rachel Lane's office. The paperwork was final. My revised will listed Alora as the sole inheritor of the house, my shares in the family trust, and the little bit of stock I had quietly held for decades. The rest, the retirement fund, the book royalties, the jewelry from Mama that had been split unevenly but silently over the years, was designated to the Southern Women's Recovery Fund, an organization I'd co-founded anonymously years before my diagnosis, back when I still believed in quiet contributions. No press release, no announcement, no signature lines, just my name, notarized, just my intentions, sealed in ink. And when I got home, I took the old will, the one I had signed with good faith before the surgery, and dropped it into the fireplace. I watched it curl, let the orange edges eat the lies. I leaned forward just enough to whisper to the flames, "Your empire just lost its crown." The next morning, I went out to check on the small apple tree I had planted during recovery. It stood at the edge of the garden, a little taller than the last time I noticed it, though it still hadn't borne fruit. The blossoms had come and gone, but nothing remained. No buds, no promise of growth. I crouched down beside it, brushing away fallen petals, when I heard the side gate squeak open. It was Alora. She closed the gate gently behind her and made her way over with a shy smile. "Hey," she said, her voice soft. "I didn't mean to sneak up on you." "You didn't," I replied, dusting my hands on my pants. "This tree's just being stubborn." She studied it for a moment, then said, "May I take a branch? I want to plant one at school. Maybe it'll do better away from here." I paused. Then I nodded, went inside, and returned with pruning shears and some damp paper towels. I clipped a healthy branch, small but full of green, and wrapped it carefully, then placed it in her hands. "You take care of it," I told her. "I will." She hugged me then, and it didn't feel obligatory. It felt like history trying to shift directions. Later that week, Alora came by with an envelope. She didn't knock, just slipped it under my door. Inside was the invitation. "Celebration of Legacy," it read. A family-wide dinner hosted by Isolde. There was a dress code, there were awards, a keynote speech, a foundation presentation. And at the bottom, in gold cursive, honoring those who carried the Renford torch. I wasn't mentioned once. Alora had scribbled on the corner, "I had no idea. I'm sorry." I stared at the invitation for a long time. Then I folded it and placed it next to the fireplace, untouched. "She's hosting her own coronation," I told Rachel the next day over tea. "Let her. We'll bring the thunder." By the end of that week, the final packet was ready. Rachel handed me a thick envelope. Inside was everything: a certified copy of my new will, proof of the anonymous endowment transfer, trust documents naming me as the original and rightful founder of the Southern Women's Recovery Fund, and a notarized affidavit outlining Isolde's use of falsified materials. Tucked into the back was a list of timestamps, screenshots, and emails collected by Alora, quiet evidence of the digital surgery that had tried to erase me from our legacy. I placed everything into a cream-colored envelope and sealed it with a quiet hand. Then I went home and wrapped a silk ribbon around it, not for flair, but because I knew Isolde would interpret it as smugness, and that pleased me. That night, I cleaned the house, Not obsessively, just enough to feel control. I laid out a dress for the event, set aside my mother's pearls, and ran my fingers over the manila envelope once more before placing it into my handbag. In the morning, I stepped out into the crisp spring air and walked to the mailbox. It was still early, birds barely rustling in the trees, Charleston still rubbing sleep from its eyes. I opened the box, slipped the envelope inside, and let the lid fall with a satisfying thunk. Whatever came next, I was ready. The morning of the celebration of legacy arrived just as I expected. Warm, clear, quiet. The kind of Charleston day where everything feels dressed up in light, as if nothing painful has ever happened in this city. I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing down the front of my navy blue dress. Mama's pearls rested against my collarbone. They weren't flashy, just enough, just honest. The ride to the Renford estate was uneventful, but my chest tightened the moment I turned into the long, circular drive. From outside, the house looked like something from a bridal magazine, soft lights glowing in every window, string lights swaying from magnolia trees, voices carrying from the back patio like some curated melody. The entire evening had been staged for illusion. Isolde greeted guests like a movie star. Hair curled, dress tailored, smile laminated. "Welcome," she said to one couple from the board. "So glad you could join us. We're so proud of what the foundation's become." "It's more than I ever dreamed it could be." She spotted me then. The smile didn't leave her face, but her eyes flinched. Just a twitch. Most wouldn't catch it. I did. I stepped through the crowd slowly, nodded at people I knew, thanked those who gave me confused but polite smiles. Some whispered, likely wondering why I was there at all. The speeches began shortly after sunset. The estate's veranda had been cleared for a stage, complete with a microphone, chairs arranged like a small theater. Elora sat near the front, her hands clasped tight in her lap. Isolde took the mic first, of course. "Tonight," she began, "we honor the women who built this legacy, our mother, our aunts, the matriarchs who came before us, and the torchbearers who carry it now." Applause. A few tears. She listed names, all familiar, all tied to the Renford bloodline in some way, except mine. Not once did she speak it. "And to close," she said, with a hint of drama, "I'd like to thank those who've stood by this family in its brightest and darkest moments. You know who you are, and your loyalty will never be forgotten." She stepped away from the mic, clearly assuming the event was hers now, crowned and done. But then one of the board members turned to me. "Would you like to say a few words, Mireya?" Isolde paused, hand still on her wineglass. I smiled, walked up slowly, took the mic in both hands. "I wasn't planning to," I said, voice steady, warm. "But maybe a short story." I looked at the crowd, not as guests, but as witnesses. When our mother passed, I planted a tree. Just a little apple sapling behind my kitchen window. It wasn't much. I watered it, protected it from frost, waited for it to bloom, but it didn't. For years it grew but never bore fruit, until last week when my niece asked if she could take a branch to start her own tree at school. I paused. Elora looked up, her eyes wet. That was the first time I realized something could come from the silence, that maybe what I was growing wasn't fruit, but legacy. The crowd murmured softly. A few clapped. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small speaker. Before she passed, our mother left something. Not a letter. A voice message. It was for me, and maybe for all of us. I pressed play. The sound came through, crackling slightly. "If you're hearing this, someone tried to erase your place in this family. Don't let them. Don't give them your silence. You have a right to be seen, Mireya." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a fork fall. Isolde froze. Her grip on the wineglass slipped, only slightly, but enough for me to see it tremble. Elora let out a breath like she'd been holding it all evening. Her shoulders sagged. Her eyes were on me, not Isolde. Then a voice from the crowd broke the quiet. "Wait, you're not the founder of the Women's Fund?" It came from Aunt Meredith's youngest. A college kid who probably hadn't meant to cause a scene, but had lit the match anyway. A few heads turned. Isolde looked directly at me. Her face didn't change, but I saw it. The unraveling, the tiny fracture in her control, the crack in the crown. She turned, gathered her purse with precision, and walked out. Not fast, not storming, but each step echoed like she was walking through water. Afterward, people didn't speak to me right away. They weren't sure what to say. That was fine. They'd speak later. Once they processed it. Once they looked at the program again and wondered what else had been omitted. Elora sat beside me as I gathered my things. "She'll call," she said. "She already did," I replied. When I got home that night, there was a voicemail waiting. "This isn't over," Isolde's voice said. I didn't listen to the rest. I deleted it. The following afternoon, the board of the Renford Foundation met in their usual space, Isolde's sunroom, filled with upholstered chairs, fresh tulips, and too many framed photos of her on volunteer trips. The meeting was meant to be a recap of the legacy event, with light refreshments and more compliments than decisions. But halfway through, a courier arrived at the front door with a legal envelope addressed directly to the Foundation's board. Isolde took the packet first. Her manicured fingers hesitated for just a breath before she slid it open with the edge of a dessert knife. She pulled out the documents, her eyes scanning the words quickly. I imagine she paused when she saw my name at the top, not in footnotes, not in acknowledgments, but on the header, legal letterhead, time-stamped, notarized. "Effective immediately," the letter read. "Mireya Sorrell revokes all intellectual and financial contributions previously made to the Renford Women's Fund, citing fraudulent representation, unauthorized appropriation of founder identity, and reputational damage." Her co-chair, a man named Richard, who had known both of us since college, let out a sharp breath. "Is this real?" Isolde didn't answer. He reached for the second page. "She has the original charter," he muttered. Silence filled the room, the type that spreads fast and settles into people's skin. Meanwhile, across town, I sat in Rachel Lane's office, sipping tea with a quietness that wasn't peace but precision. Everything had been filed. The will, the audit request, the ownership transfer. Elora would be listed as the full beneficiary of the house, the garden, and any inheritance that came through our side of the family. The Southern Women's Recovery Fund would receive everything else. No one else needed to know until it was done. And now, it was... A week later, I sat in the family attorney's office for what everyone assumed would be the final distribution of my estate. The invitation had gone out under the impression I might be stepping back from legal control, or life altogether. The seating was stiff, polite, controlled. Isolde arrived in beige, always beige, as if blending into the background would make her untouchable. When the lawyer opened the sealed envelope, he didn't speak right away. He pressed play on a small recorder. It was my voice. "I leave everything not to those who claimed me, but to those who saw me." A pause. "To Elora Renford, who asked nothing and stood by anyway, I leave the home that held my silence and the garden that never bloomed, until her." The room went still. "To the Southern Women's Recovery Fund, which continues the work I began before anyone cared, I leave the remainder. May it grow in places I will never see." And then, "To others, I leave nothing. You inherited my absence long before I wrote it down." The lawyer clicked the recorder off. Isolde sat motionless. Her face remained composed, but her hand, resting against her bag, curled into a tight fist. No one said her name. No one had to. Later that week, Marshall tried to call. He'd caught wind of the legal changes and wanted to talk in person, as if a cup of coffee could rewire betrayal. I didn't answer. Instead, I had papers sent to his office. The envelope was simple, no return address on the outside. Inside, divorce papers, signed, dated, finalized. No note, just a post-it attached to the final page. "You're free now. That's what you wanted, isn't it?" He didn't respond. That was fine. A few days after that, I visited the county clerk's office. The woman behind the desk asked if I was sure, like it was a decision made from spite, not survival. "I'm sure," I said. We removed Isolde from every emergency contact, every trustee line, every next of kin designation. I left only Alora and the law. On the last form, where they asked for additional notes, I wrote, "You removed me from the family. I'm just returning the gesture," with ink. I didn't feel powerful. I felt corrected, like a crooked picture finally realigned. That evening, I came home to a package on my doorstep. Inside was a photo. Alora standing in her dorm room, holding a glass jar. Inside was the apple branch I had given her. It had sprouted. The note said, "It's already growing. Love you." I placed the photo on my kitchen windowsill, right next to the fading rosemary, and smiled, not wide, not bright, but steady. That night, while I sipped tea, a news headline came through on my phone. Renford Foundation under audit. Board scrambles to explain missing history. I didn't click the article. I just turned the phone over and watched the garden lights flicker on outside. That morning, the light coming through the kitchen window was softer than usual, almost reluctant. I moved slower, but not out of weakness, just intention. There was no longer anything chasing me, no battles to plan, no reputations to reclaim. I lit the stove and brewed a small pot of coffee, letting the smell fill the room. Cinnamon and apples lingered from the night before. I'd baked more tarts than I needed, but that's how I do things now. I don't cook for occasion anymore. I cook for peace, for rhythm. The house no longer echoed when I walked through it. It hummed, a kind of low warmth. My body still carried its own reminders, faint aches from recovery, a tight pull across my side where the scar remained. But they were no longer warnings, just stories written in skin. I opened the back door and stepped into the morning sun. The apple tree stood taller, fuller, and this time it held something new. 3 small apples, green, imperfect but firm, hung near the middle branch. I reached up, gently twisted one free, and held it in my palm. I smiled, quietly, not like someone who'd won anything, but like someone who finally understood what growing meant. Back inside, I set the apple on the counter and pulled out the tray of tarts. Most were already cooled. I boxed up a few for Mrs. Walden across the street. One went into a paper bag for Alora. The rest, I wrapped for the pantry. On each jar of preserves, I stuck a label, October Year 1. I don't know what made me pick that phrase. Maybe it was because everything before felt like a long chapter with no title. Now, at least, this part had one. While the jars cooled, I went to the den and opened the cedar chest tucked beneath Mama's old rocker. Inside were letters I'd written but never mailed. One to Marshall, one to Isolde. I read a few lines aloud, voice steady. To Marshall, you thought choosing her meant freedom. But freedom isn't running away. It's standing still in the truth. And you never could. I folded the letter back, gently. No desire to burn it. No need to send it. Then the one for Isolde. You took everything you thought mattered. The title, the house, the story. But you forgot the only thing you couldn't touch. Myself. I didn't even feel anger as I said it. Just closure. Not the kind you find in courtrooms or confrontation, but the kind that happens when you decide to stop asking why. The knock came around midday. I opened the door and found Alora holding a photo. It bloomed, she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. She handed me the picture. Her apple branch, cut from mine, planted in her campus's community garden, had taken root. A single blossom bloomed from the center. I applied for a grant, she added, grinning. Named it after you. A mentorship fund for women who've survived. We sat on the porch steps, sipping lemonade. Neither of us brought up Isolde, or Marshall, or the board. We talked about her classes, her new apartment, and what flowers she might plant next to the tree. When she left, I watched her walk down the path, braids swaying behind her, the same path Isolde used to walk as a child. But today, it didn't feel like it belonged to her anymore. That evening, I tended to the garden alone, pulled a few weeds, moved a stepping stone, fed the soil, and then I just stood there, letting the last of the light rest on my face. I didn't feel the need to be seen anymore, or heard, or remembered even. But I did feel planted. I thought back to who I was when all this began, The quiet one, the background name, the youngest, the peacemaker, the one who watched everyone else take what they wanted. And now, I was still quiet. Still youngest, but not forgotten. Not anymore. The root that grows in silence lives the longest. I came inside, washed my hands, and picked up the last jar of apple preserves. I placed it carefully on the shelf beside an old frame, one that once held my wedding photo, now filled with a picture of me and Alora under the blooming tree. No crowns, no slogans, just soil, sky, and the kind of peace you only earn when no one's looking. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to protect us are the ones who quietly try to erase us. But silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. Mireya's story reminds us that dignity, patience, and truth are louder than betrayal. Have you ever been cut out of your own family's story? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And if this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful family stories that speak to the heart.